If everyone could find a seat, please, we'd like to get started. Okay, so we are going to get started. Let us start off tonight with the Pledge of Allegiance. So would you please join me and rise? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's forum hosted by the Conejo Valley Unified School District. My name is Kyle Jory. I'm editor of the Thousand Oaks Acorn newspaper, and I will be serving as the moderator of tonight's event. I'm excited to see so many faces in the audience, and I'd like to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here tonight. Your attendance is a testament to this community's reputation as a place where residents stand up and get involved in the decisions that affect their daily lives. And I can think of no other topic more worthy of your time and energy than that of the education of our children. We're here tonight to talk about Common Core, the name given to a new set of school standards and curriculum that are currently being introduced into California public schools. Tonight you'll have the opportunity to hear from a highly qualified, distinguished group of educators and scholars about what Common Core is, where it came from, and most importantly, what it means to the students of the Conejo Valley. So that we have as much time as possible to get to your questions, I'll cut my opening remarks short and get straight to our introductions. First, let me introduce any members of the Conejo Valley Unified School District Boards of Education who are here tonight. So let me start off with Board President. That is Dr. Timothy Stevens. We have the clerk of the board, Mike Dunn. Mike. Also tonight in attendance, we have the Thousand Oaks representative serving on the Ventura County School Board. That is Marty Bates. Marty. And finally, we have the Thousand Oaks representative serving on the Ventura County Community College Board. That's Diane McKay. Diane. I'd also like to briefly thank those behind the scenes tonight that are making this event happen, and that includes video technicians Richard Blake and Richard Bateman. Thank you very much. So all of you are aware, tonight's forum is being videotaped and will be broadcast on the local educational TV channel at a later date. The school district will put this information up on its website so you can know when to watch this. Also, a recording of tonight's forum will be made available to any member of the public who requests it. To get a copy, just call the district headquarters on Jans Road. Now, let me introduce our distinguished panel. Starting here to my left, we have Peggy Walker. Peggy is a history and social studies teacher at Newbury Park High School, where she is also the school's very successful mock trial advisor. She has served public education for over 30 years as a teacher and a mentor teacher. She is a teacher trainer in educational technology with the Ventura County Office of Education and serves on several regional and state level curriculum councils. In 2011, Peggy was honored as the CVUSD and Ventura County Teacher of the Year, and she was a finalist for the State Teacher of the Year Award in 2012. Thank you. To her left, we have Mike Soleil. Mike is the president of Corwin Press, an educational publishing company headquartered right here in Newbury Park. He is also the proud parent of 3 Conejo Valley Unified School District students. He has served as a very active member of CVUSD, a parent-led district advisory council, and is currently the president of the Conejo Schools Foundation. Thank you, Mike. To Mike's left, we have Dr. Sandra Stotsky. Dr. Stotsky is a professor emerita from the University of Arkansas and a former senior associate commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Education. Dr. Stotsky is credited with developing one of the country's strongest sets of academic standards for K-12 students, as well as the strongest academic standards and tests for prospective teachers. She is known nationwide for her in-depth analysis of the problems in Common Core's English language arts standards. She has also been published extensively in professional journals and is the author of several books. She also, most importantly, has served on the Common Core Validation Board and has provided expert testimony before the U.S. Congress and multiple state legislatures on the issue of Common Core. To her left, we have Dr. John Sand. Dr. Sand is the Director of Curriculum and Assessment for the Conejo Valley Unified School District. He has served public education over 25 years as an elementary and secondary classroom teacher and mentor teacher, and as an elementary and secondary school dean and principal. As a teacher, he was honored with the Amgen Award for Teaching Excellence in Science, and he also serves as an adjunct professor at local universities. To his left, we have Dr. Bill Evers. Dr. Evers is an expert in education policy, especially as it pertains to curriculum, teaching, testing, and accountability. Dr. Evers is a research fellow at the Hoover Institution and a member of the institution's Correct Task Force on K-12 education. Dr. Evers served as the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Education for Policy from 2007 to 2009. In 2003, he served in Iraq as a senior advisor for education. He has been a member of the National Educational Research Policy and Priorities Board, a commissioner on the California State Academic Standards Commission, a trustee on the Santa Clara County Board of Education, and a president of the Board of Directors of the East Palo Alto Charter School. He currently serves on former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger's California Academic Content Standards Commission. To his left, we have Mr. Tony Dolz. Tony is the co-founder and executive director of the Concerned Parents of the Conejo Valley. It is this group's concern over Common Core that resulted in this forum being held tonight. Mr. Dolz is a parent of 2 children in the district and a previous candidate for the school board. And finally, to his left, we have Dr. Jeff Barstad. He's the superintendent of the Conejo Unified School District. He has served public education for over 35 years as an elementary and secondary school teacher and principal, and as a district-level administrator in both business and personnel services. He has served on several regional and state-level committees dealing with educational finance and leadership, and as an adjunct professor at local universities. He was recently named the 2013 Superintendent of the Year for the California Central Coast region by the Association of California School Administrators. So that is our panel. So without further ado, let me quickly run down the format of tonight's event. First, the panelists will spend about 30 minutes sharing with you some facts, their thoughts, and their concerns on Common Core. Following those presentations, the panelists will spend about 15 to 20 minutes in a roundtable format, with each speaker having about 2 minutes to address different questions concerning Common Core. At the end of the roundtable, we'll move on to the question and answer portion of the evening. At that time, members of the audience will be invited to come up to this microphone on my right here and to this microphone on the left over there, where you'll have 1 minute to either ask the panelists a question or make a statement on the topic of Common Core. We ask that if you come up to make a statement that you please state your first and last name and your city of residence. And after each question and or statement, each speaker will be allowed a maximum of 2 minutes to respond so we can get to as many questions as possible. I will be asking all parties involved to adhere as strictly as possible to the time limits that were agreed on prior to the forum. At the end of the question and answer session, we'll hear final comments from Mr. Tony Dolz and Dr. Barstad, and then we'll wrap up the forum hopefully no later than 8 p.m. So thanks again for everyone coming, and to get us started off, let's go to you, Dr. Evers.
So curriculum content standards are catalogs, lists of topics that children are supposed to learn in each grade, and the teachers are expected to teach them. And accompanying these Common Core national curriculum content standards are also a set of national tests, and California is adhering to one of these sets of tests. So these particular standards were written by a handful of people and under the sponsorship of some inside the Beltway, inside Washington, D.C. area advocacy and lobbying groups, particularly the advocacy group for state governors and for state school chiefs. Now, the first thing I think anyone should be concerned about is how academically strong are these, and I'm going to concentrate on math. And so they're missing topics. So for example, the definition of pi is missing. The area of a triangle is missing. There are dozens of missing topics. Most importantly, fluency with representation and conversion of percentages, fractions, and decimals back and forth between each other. So when I served on the Academic Content Standards Commission in 2010, we tried to supplement and fix all these errors and missing topics, but this was 2010. But unfortunately, within the last year, the State Board of Education has taken out scores of these fixes, so it's sort of back to the often unfixed national standards as they are. Okay, so now, how about experimental methods? Well, in geometry, there's a central topic called similar and congruent triangles. And if you reach back in your memories, you think angle, side, angle, side, angle, side. I know you don't necessarily use it anymore, but you could learn it again if you once knew it. So that's the standard algorithm, the standard teaching technique, learning technique for similar and congruent triangles. Well, they're not going to do it that way. They're using rigid motion. This has never been successfully taught in K-12 education in any country, in any province or state, in any city, in any time in human history. But the whole country's going to do it this way. Okay, now how about if there's a problem? How can we fix this? So when I was on the California Standards Commission in 2010, I was reading through the English standards, and I noticed there was an odd thing about long and short vowels in the early grades and the primary grades. So it's a small world of people that are involved in this, so I called up the person that wrote it. I said, gee, it looks like there's a mistake here. She said, yeah, that's right, there's a mistake. But, of course, 35 states had already adopted it, and they can't change it. So it's in there, in the mistake, and the tests will be done on the mistaken English standards. And there's no way to fix it. There's no body, there's no organization, there's no format for that. All right, I guess the next most important question that if I were a parent or a teacher or an administrator would be, is this going to work? Is this going to boost student achievement? There are a number of people that have worked on this question, but Tom Lovelace of the Brookings Institution has pointed out that if you talk about trying to explain the variance between classrooms and this sort of thing, this is a technical thing, but I will just say the following. We have already gotten in California what we're going to get from having standards in terms of improving student performance, improving teacher performance. That is his conclusion. We're not going to get something new from these different standards. Now, what about countries around the world? Well, most countries are not as decentralized and so forth as we are in the United States. They're more hierarchical, they're more everything run from their national capital. And of course, we are drifting in that direction. But so the countries that are worse than the United States have national standards. The countries that are better than the United States have, some of them have national standards too. So you can't really tell because there's only a few countries that are somewhat like the United States, pretty decentralized. But the interesting thing is that two countries that are pretty similar to the United States, Australia and Canada, have even less national control centralization than the United States. And they are doing better. Back in the 1970s, they were in about the same position we were on international tests. But they've been climbing. And they have, Canada doesn't even have a national Department of Education. They don't have any national coordination at all. So, I don't think it's going to work. Now, we have in the United States, and this is another, so I've been talking sort of kitchen table, is it going to help our children? But I think there's also a long-run question about what kind of children, what kind of country our children will inherit and our grandchildren will inherit. So we have something in the United States that goes back to the design of our Constitution by James Madison, and that's competitive federalism. So you have 50 states, you have all these school boards, you have all these water district boards, we have all these refuse, sanitation boards, all these different things. They're all competing, and people can move around, and they're all competing for businesses and so forth. So they're different, and they're doing things differently. So they can be, by having these, you can have closer approximation to voter preferences, you can experiment, and you can innovate, and you protect liberty by people being able to move around to something that's closer to what they want. Okay, so now we have this national program run by this cartel of the states and funded by the tests that enforce it, that police it, are funded by the federal government, their creation. And so this is an attack on competitive federalism, and it's an attack on the design of our constitutional system. And I say to you that 50 states are better than one executive branch bureaucracy. And 15,000 school districts are better than one national executive branch bureaucracy. So let me close by saying what one California teacher said. We're about to start testing on standards we're not teaching with curriculum we don't have on computers that don't exist.
Dr. Stotsky, if you'd like to begin.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here tonight. I would like to start out by saying that there are almost 15 states that are now in the process of trying to extricate themselves from Common Core. We hope this will be the beginning of the effort here in California. I'm now back full-time in Massachusetts and hoping to be able to do that in Massachusetts as well. Massachusetts and California, along with Indiana, were three states that had some of the best state standards in the country, all abandoned for Common Core's standards, which are vastly inferior. And I will speak to that mainly because that has been my major concern, the quality of the standards. Let me begin by saying, first of all, that I am philosophically not a libertarian. I believe in high standards, and I think there is a role for local and state governments to make in setting high standards for all to equalize academic expectations. However, unless we have first-class standards, there's no point in having standards at all. So that's my basic premise. Common Core standards were copyrighted by the two private groups that developed them, and those standards cannot be changed without their permission, which does not seem likely. As Dr. Evers explained, 15% could be added, but they will not be assessed. Only the standards that are in Common Core will be assessed. And they were developed mainly by people who are in the testing industry. That was the first clue to me that there was a problem when I was on Common Core's validation committee. There were no people writing those standards who had teaching experience in writing standards for K-12 or who had any teaching experience for K-12. That was something we valued highly in Massachusetts when we were developing our own state standards. The basic problems are that they are non-competitive standards. because they have not been benchmarked internationally. I was on the committee asking regularly for information about what countries we were benchmarked to, could never get them. Any names of committees of countries could not get the names or citations for the research, supposedly, that the standards were based on. And so Professor Milgram, who was the one mathematician on the validation committee, and I, who was the only English language arts expert, were among the 5 people who did not sign off at the end. The charge to our committee was to confirm, indeed, that Common Core standards could be validated because they were internationally benchmarked and research-based, and they weren't. They are not rigorous standards, despite the fact that people use that word over and over and over again, parrot-like. Their college readiness level is about at 10th grade or so. It's less than Algebra 2, let me put it that way. I asked Jason Zimba when he came to the Massachusetts Board of Education, because I was on the state board for 4 years, how he would describe mathematically the college readiness level in math, and he said, it's minimal readiness for a non-selective college. So that tells you what college readiness meant. In English, it's a little harder to see because we don't know where exactly the cut score is going to be and the level of difficulty of the English passages. I'm concerned with the level of the English passages at the high school level. The elementary standards are not as bad as the secondary standards, which are weak. They will not lead to analytical thinking or critical thinking because they do not have the kinds of indicators in their standards that will lead to the kind of critical thinking that could be done with complex texts that used to be taught years ago. Where does critical thinking come from? It comes from the reading that English teachers used to require of complex literary texts that had demanding levels at the end of high school, grades 11 and 12. We do not see much that's going to be able to be in the standards because what Common Core has mandated is a 50% division between something called informational text and something called literature from K to 12. That means a reduction of literary study in all secondary grades. That is not the direction we should be going in for improving all students' ability or capacity to become good critical thinkers when they go, if they want to college. So we have a problem of non-research-based standards as well as non-internationally benchmarked standards because there is no research. I have a reading research background by graduate training, and every reading researcher I have spoken to said there is no research to suggest that if you have a heavy dose of informational reading, that will improve your college readiness. Absolutely nothing to go on. The basic problem stems from the writing of the standards by people connected to the testing industry because it is the cost of the technology and the professional development that is going to be driving the concerns that many of you will be having over the years, including superintendents who are going to have to figure out where to get the money for both the technology that's required as well as the professional development required for both math and English. They were not developed, as I say, by people who had taught. And in fact, one of the greatest deficiencies, which I kept pointing out, was the lack of involvement by higher education faculty, who, after all, can better tell you what college readiness means than those who teach college freshman courses in mathematics and in English, or high school teachers in math and English working with them. Those were the two groups excluded from the development of these standards. That was my major clue that there was a serious problem in that the very two groups of people who know what college readiness means were not there to develop the standards. So that is what you need to do here in California. After all, your previous standards were in mathematics developed by your higher education faculty. both science and mathematics. That is why they were considered the gold standard in the country. And now we have Common Core, which is not even internationally benchmarked. Your math and science standards used to be, because that was part of the criteria for their development. English was a different story, because there were only a few other English-speaking countries.
Dr. Stotsky, you have about 10 seconds.
I'm sorry.
About 10 seconds left.
10 seconds.
Okay.
I will say that is about all. I helped to develop the English language arts standards here because I had been working on Massachusetts standards, so I know how good they were. You have lost the best standards that you had.
Thank you.
That's all I can say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I'd like to turn it over to Mike Soleil to talk about the origin and development of the Common Core state standards.
Thank you very much. Great to be here. Thank you, Kyle. And thank you all for coming out to this community event. It's great to see people here. There's a little bit of misinformation in the sense that I don't represent CVUSD. I don't speak on their behalf. I am the president of Corwin Press, which is the largest independent publisher of educational resources in the country. And so we are really a reflection of the marketplace of ideas. So we publish a great deal of Common Core titles that are preparing the marketplace and preparing our teachers for the changeover to the standards. And we publish an awful lot of things that are looking at alternatives, especially in the state of Texas and some other places. But what I was asked to do was just to give a little bit of perspective in terms of how did this all come about? I think very quickly, because this is can get very complex, and we've got some great experts here who can, I think, add additional commentary as we go through the roundtable and questions. I really want you to think about a couple of things. The first of those is one that's very important that was already brought up, and that is that while we have a federal Department of Education, historically we have been state and locally driven. And that is one where we've got 16,600 school districts across the country that make their own decisions in terms of what it is that they want to do and how they want to adopt it, with great deal of guidance. During this period of time, we've also seen an increase in the level of federal funding. Historically, it had always been at about 5-6%. Today, it's about 10%. And when we get into that, it becomes important as we get into this conversation a little bit further. Two big periods that I want you to think about in the modern era. The first of those is a concept called universal access. That was the goal for education for years and years, starting with Brown versus Board of Education, moving into ESEA, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, IDEA, and a number of others, where really what it was about was opening the doors to all kids. Equity and access, leveling the playing field, creating programs like Title I and Title II and Title III. That all changed in 2001 with the election of George W. Bush, where we see the passage of No Child Left Behind. And many of you have heard of No Child Left Behind. And what it did was enter a new era that we currently are in, which is about universal proficiency. That children will have all children will be at universal proficiency by 2014. And what it allowed each state to do was to decide how are you going to get there between 2002 and 2014 based upon high stakes assessments. The focus was on standards and assessments and accountability. Conversations have gone on for years and years about a national curriculum and have always been rejected because the federal government was involved. But something unique happened in 2009, coming out of discussions that had happened earlier in the 90s with the business community, who were saying, what's the quality of a diploma? How do we know that if somebody graduates, they're actually work ready or career ready or college ready? And so a lot of the business groups met and created a group called Achieve, Inc. And they started something called the Diploma Project. And they tried to begin to look at some national standards. That didn't happen. But in 2009, the National Governors Association, made up of the governors of all the states, and the CCSSO, the Council of Chief State School Officers, came together with a group of experts and created something called the Common Core State Standards. Each state met, decided whether or not they were going to adopt these standards, and they were focused on English language arts and on math. 2009 through 2010, the states across the country held hearings, public hearings all across the country, locally, in their state capitals, to have a conversation and debate about Common Core. In 2010, California held meetings in the state and received over 10,000 comments on Common Core and whether or not it should be adopted. The final California Common Core standards were adopted in June of 2010, and the State Board of Education adopted it along with 45 other states in the District of Columbia. And we now are at the point where we're about to move into the implementation phase. So now it's real in terms of the rollout of these standards, which you're going to hear much more about in terms of practice and some of the other research that's here on the panel. But it's important for you to know that each of those states is adopting it in their own way. And I know, as someone who is creating material that goes along with training, that different states are approaching it in very different ways and are localizing what it is that they're doing and how they're using those standards. So it should be an interesting debate. It can get very complicated very quickly, and I'm looking forward to answering any questions as we go along.
Thank you. Now, Dr. San to speak about, Dr. San will speak about changes in curriculum and instruction with the Common Core state standards.
Thank you, Mr. Jory. At the local level, we've found that Common Core standards...
Could you pull the mic up a little bit closer? I'm sorry.
I was saying at the local level, we have found that the Common Core standards are as rigorous and equally engaging opportunities for both our teachers and students as we integrate 21st century skills, often referred to as the 4 C's, into everyday learning. With technology-enhanced lessons and assessments, we will incorporate effective research-based strategies and practices to meaningfully challenge our learning. Together, we will practice those 4 C's: creativity, collaboration, critical thinking, and communication. The Common Core state standards are not about doing one more thing, but about doing things fundamentally differently. It is about using all instructional minutes. Standards are established with developmentally appropriate sequencing and higher rigor than what we've found with our current 1997 California state standards. Students will be asked to demonstrate their understanding of skills and concepts at higher levels of thinking. The Common Core is not a standards checklist approach model that we have found with the 1997 standards, but rather an integrated standards approach. Literacy standards for reading, writing, listening, and speaking, and language are in the Common Core are a shared responsibility now of multiple subject areas, including social science, science, and the technical subjects. In math, learning comes through the standards of mathematical practice, effective habits, and strategies, not in isolation. A lack of understanding effectively prevents a student from engaging in the mathematical practices. Mr. Jory, I'm not sure of my time. How much?
You still have another 3.5 minutes.
The Common Core standards support instruction around conceptual models, an area of study, a big idea, a driving question, concepts, sub-concepts, and engaging learning experiences. Integration will occur across the curriculum and disciplines with extension activities tied to those standards. The essential questions are often student-generated. In planning for the new standards here locally, it will not be uncommon for our history and our English teachers working collaboratively, as will math and science teachers as well. Some folks fear that a shift from the current California state standards to the new Common Core standards is a watering down of expectations and rigor. In fact, we're finding the opposite to be the case. The paradigm shift is for us to get past simply determining the correct answer to now identify and understand the process, strategies, and concepts, and then to determine and evaluate the correct answer. The Common Core standards, what we're finding is that the Common Core standards will do just that, tied to our implementation, which we will determine at the local level. Here in the Conejo Valley, our schools annually demonstrate exceptional performance by multiple measures. Still, we must not be placated into thinking that we have arrived. No matter the school, no matter the classroom, we have a responsibility to provide appropriate and engaging learning for all of our students. Until all students get to independence, they will never get to proficiency. In addition, we have found that in addition to sequence and rigor, we have noted the following shifts. In language arts, more balance of content to include both literature and informational text, including primary and secondary source documents. English teachers will continue with the literature that they've identified and love, but it's a shared responsibility, as I've said, across the disciplines. Knowledge in the disciplines. Greater emphasis, again, is on language outside the English classroom. In the ELA standards, as we refer it, English Language Arts, they establish a staircase of increasing text complexity with the progressive development of reading comprehension. We find that the expectations for our students in terms of reading lexiles, for lack of a better phrase, is higher. Text-based answers, in the past, students could read the story and glean from it enough information. Now they're going to be asked to look at particular passages and paragraphs and identify the thought process and the true meaning that the author is trying to convey. And in addition, we're asking students to expand their thinking and write from sources. They will build vocabulary by focusing on not just pivotal but common found words, not just academic language. And in math, in addition to the changes in sequence, such as moving the introduction of probability from grade 3 to grade 7, and fractions as numbers from grade 2 to 3, we've found standards organized around focus, on strong foundational knowledge and deep conceptual understanding. We found on coherence, fluency, where students through a speed and accuracy can identify their understanding, deeper understanding, application, and dual intensity. Both practice and understanding are emphasized.
Your time is up, Dr. San.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now we are going to have, thank you, Dr. San. Now we will have Peggy Walker speaking on how will the Common Core state standards look in the classroom. Peggy.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm glad to see all you here. I, with my 30 years experience, have taught in 3 states. In all 3 states, I've been on curriculum development committees and also on textbook selection committees. All 3 states have been very different. Let me use, for example, Clark County School District. When I taught there, I was on the textbook committee, which was also the curriculum committee, and there were no state guidelines at all. And so we would look at textbooks and choose what we thought was the best, and the publisher became the source of direction for our courses of study. Then I began teaching at Conejo Valley Unified and volunteered to write the course of study for the world history courses. And rather than the style I was used to, my task was to take the textbook and make sure it was aligned to the standards, first to the state framework, and then to the standards. And then anything that was missing, any holes, we would find materials that would support it, so the teacher felt like they had the full depth of ability to meet the standards. I've worked with the standards since 1990, so I'm very comfortable with the framework and the standards. And the title of our standards is actually History and Social Science Content Standards for California Public Schools. So the model is very standardized, but the focus is on content. And process was not a major focus. In fact, at the beginning of the explanation for the standards for high school, it says, the intellectual skills are to be learned through and applied to the content standards. They're to be assessed only in conjunction with the content standards. Now that limits us in today's world, because we can Google, we can find the information, but we need to go beyond the content. And so Common Core takes us beyond using the strengths and lessons of state standards. And California is strong, as Dr. Stotsky mentioned, and it was one that they followed and modeled after. But the shift is toward research-based pedagogy. And the emphasis of Common Core is on process. And the focus is on results rather than the means. So content is still there. Content is still important in our schools and important in Common Core, but the added emphasis is process. So students are expected to know and be able to do. I want to show you what that looks like. Now, I teach seniors, and so it's kind of back mapped from kindergarten to high school. So this is kind of the end result. But this is just in my classroom this month. I had students in a statistics class that needed to do a survey. So groups came to me and said, "Can we use your students as our sample population?" And I said, yes, as long as you come and report to the students, because that's the ethical thing to do, what the results would be. So the group that I'm referring to, their question was, I teach AP psychology, and so their question was to the students, do you feel more prepared for the multiple choice or free response sections of the psychology AP exam? That was the first question. The second question was, what score do you think you earned, and how confident are you in the score that you think you earned? And results don't come out till July, and so they have to take their best guess. The students came in to talk to my students who were their sample population, and I teach 5 sections of AP Psych, so that was the entire target population that they were looking at. They had charts, they had graphs, they explained their process, they talked about how they determined the sample, what their role was as a sample. I just want to, at the risk of losing you, which wouldn't be unusual, with high school kids, the language that they were using, the fluency with which they used, was exactly what we want our students that are coming to college to do. So how is it Common Core? They had choice. These kids chose their own topic of study. It was relevant to them, which is Common Core. They had taken the AP psychology test. They were interested in the question. It had real-life application. They worked collaboratively and independently. The fluency, they used terms that were consistent. They had to form their question, then operationalize it, which means they had to make it measurable. They had to have a hypothesis to test, which meant they had to design the study. They had to identify the target population, how the sample population was going to actually test that. They had to obtain the data in some way that was measurable and authentic. And the next one for Common Core is demonstrating deep conceptual understanding through the application of content, knowledge, and skills. So once they attained the data, they had to decide what inferential testing to use. In the first question, they chose chi-squared, and they explained this to my students. They had to find the p-value, and based on the alpha level, they rejected the null hypothesis. And their second question was, they gave it a 1 proportion z-test. Who was their audience? It was the subjects that took and it was me. In their introduction, they said, and I quote, "By performing tests on the survey questions, we are hoping to help Mrs. Walker to be able to focus her classwork and study on the exact preparation for the psychology test that the students need." All right. That is authentic testing. Just in closing, really quickly, today was my last day with my seniors, and it's bittersweet, but I get so excited for them to go to college, and when they come back, they tell me good things. They tell me students are, some are very smart and they're a little bit intimidated. They tell me that others say, how can you have a social life and still get good grades? But they tell me they're prepared. And I think with this kind of rigor and this kind of system, we're preparing our kids for college. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So, at this point, we are going to move on to the presenters roundtable. Thoughts on Common Core state standards. Each speaker will be given 2 minutes to respond to anything they've heard so far or to make any additional comments they did not make. And we can start with whoever would like to go first. Is there any takers? All right, Dr. Evers, please. 2 minutes.
So my first point is there were no hearings in California. I was on the Standards Commission. There were no hearings. We had only a few weeks to do the whole thing in order to meet the federal and state deadlines. So my question is in the context of this. Professor William McCollum of the University of Arizona, one of the 3 writers of the math standards, and the only mathematician among them, said the following about the Common Core curriculum content math standards. The overall standards are, quote, not high, certainly not in comparison with other nations, including East Asia, where math education excels. So why are we accepting these mediocre standards when California had the best math standards in the country? And my second question to the administrators and teachers of this district is, are your geometry teachers, now this was passed in mid-2010, are your geometry teachers ready right now to teach similar and congruent triangles using rigid motion the way it's taught to math majors in college? Are they ready? Will you state in public that they're ready?
Thank you. Whoever would like to speak next, please, 2 minutes. Dr. Stotsky?
I would just like to address a question that came up when I was reading some of the literature that's been written about preparation for the forum. And one of the questions was, why is this happening now? Why are people suddenly 3 years later, after 2010, asking about the standards? Part of the problem is that no one knew anything about them at the time they came out. And I will say that some state boards of education, which are the major problem in all of this, began adopting them before they were even written, which raises the question about what they thought they were adopting. Kentucky is the chief culprit there. It adopted in February of 2010 standards that hadn't been written, and most other states adopted them fairly quickly after the final version came out on June 2nd, 2010. How can you say you've had hearings in the 1 month if you've adopted them in July, which is what Massachusetts did? And I gather California adopted them in June, which suggests that there couldn't have been much of a public comment period for that time. Well, the two groups waking up now, and I'm just going to say that quickly, are mothers of children who are seeing what's happening in their children's classrooms all over the country, and legislatures that are suddenly discovering they have a huge bill for the technology that they were never told about by their own state boards of education. So that's why people are waking up. When bills hit you and when mothers see what's happening in the classroom, it's not the Tea Party grandmothers, it's the mothers of the kids in the classroom who are literally seeing the problem.
Thank you, Dr. Stotsky. Whoever would like to speak next? Oh, yeah. Mike.
I didn't realize we were going in order. Sorry
Yes.
about that. Yeah, I want to give one example of a conversation with a district to the south of us. And they are in the midst of going through the implementation phase right now of the Common Core, having come out of a period where they basically had teachers that were scripted every day and had to have real fidelity to a text. And every teacher needed to be on that same point at about the same time in every classroom. And as they are adopting this new set of standards, there's something that's interesting that's happening, and that is autonomy in the classroom, greater autonomy in the classroom for teachers. And what they're finding is that they've got greater flexibility in terms of the kind of material that they can bring into the classrooms. When you talk about creativity, collaboration, communication, and the rest, collaboration, it's not just for the kids. It means that teachers are now being empowered to do even more, to doing the things that they were called into the classroom for, and that's part of what's exciting about it. And the last point I would make is, we are a nation that learns, and so as we adopt things and we understand things better, we amend them, we change laws. People have forums just like this so that we can be better informed about what it is we should do and what's going to be most impactful for our students.
Thank you, Mike. Dr. San? Please bring the mic closer. Thank you.
Used to using a teacher voice. Apologize for that. We're very fortunate in our district in that we've had some time to learn about the Common Core standards, and plan actions for preparing both our students, our staffs, our teachers in particular, and communicating to our community what the Common Core standards mean and the ensuing assessments that'll come down the road. We're not switching or flipping that switch tomorrow. This is a process. We've spent a considerable amount of time with our staffs and our teachers in particular, based on subject area and level, to evaluate both the standards as well as current curriculum. As a classroom teacher who was involved in Every Child a Reader in Sacramento in 1995, who was very involved with the state frameworks.
That was an excellent report.
Thank you. And I was just an editor. I can't take credit for writing them. The fact is that the standards at that time were like a tidal wave for us. There were so many standards to accomplish in so many days and so many hours and so many minutes. I've heard it from independent sources that to do all the English language arts standards that we currently have would take about 27 years. In math, 30. The fact that remains is that we can't possibly do it, but we went from having to look at the standards and then feverishly try and plan our days throughout the year in terms of scope and sequence to master or at least demonstrate students' success with each of those standards. The fact is we couldn't possibly get to them all, so we did our best job. With the standards being rigorous, and I appreciate what you've said about California and Massachusetts, we're right now, I believe the approximation is about 86% of the current standards are of California state standards are in the Common Core state standards. The revisions that we saw in January and in March to the add-ons that the states were allowed, they were allowed 15% additional standards of their own. Those, not all of them, but most of those were deleted by the state of California. And my understanding there was it's a separate test, it's a separate cost, and California opted not to do so.
Dr. San, your 2 minutes are up.
Okay. Let me just say that, okay.
No, please go ahead, finish. I'm sorry. Go ahead, please
my
finish.
point.
No, you can. Please go ahead.
I really appreciate what Mrs. Walker had to say, because it's especially for our at-risk students, our English language learners, and others who don't always just read from the book and understand. The real-world applications make a difference in students. We're going to see that in our math, and we're going to see that across the curriculum.
Are you not giving equal time to both sides?
Well, I'm going to have every side speak first, and then if we have a few minutes, you can respond.
No, I think you would have.
No, we're just giving each speaker 2 minutes at this point.
Okay, so I'm the last person. And first of all, I would say that I hope that you're excited about your children being in our schools. It's a delight to be there.
Please let her speak.
Please be respectful. That's one thing that we teach in our schools, is to be respectful. And I'm excited. My children, I had 3 children go through the system. I'm looking forward to grandchildren going through the system. Our teachers work hard, and they want your children to succeed. They want them to succeed in a world that's very different than the world that you had when you graduated from high school. I appreciate the foresight of the panel and the efforts, especially of Dr. Barstad, that he truly has vision and is leading our district and will keep it where it's been in the top ranks. Thank you.
Dr. Evers, if you want another 2 minutes, since Tony is not speaking, I'll allow that. Okay, yes.
So no, he's going to speak at the end. So I still haven't heard, by the way, from the district that your teachers in geometry are prepared to teach via rigid motion. Now, one of the most important changes is that mathematics has been pushed backwards by 1 year. So California has been expecting students to be taking Algebra 1 in 8th grade. And so we got 2/3 of our students to this level. This is particularly important for students from poor families, from less educated families, from black families, Latino families, and so forth. So there was a 4-fold increase in African Americans taking Algebra 1 in 8th grade, and a 6-fold increase among Latinos taking Algebra 1 in 8th grade. Now, I don't know if you're going to stick with an apparently inferior 1997 standards that were the best in the country, or whether you're going to go with the newfangled, slowed down, not being at the level of the competitive East Asian Tigers of having Algebra 1 in 8th grade.
Dr. Barstad?
Good evening, folks. Thanks for being here tonight. It says a lot about a community when you can fill a room to talk about educational policy, and regardless of what you believe is right or wrong, the fact that you're here is, as an educator, very encouraging to us. Kyle, thanks for moderating. To my fellow panel members, thanks for being here. I've got some things I want to say from a little bit of a local perspective, but I want to answer two of Dr. Evers' questions. First of all, 80% of our 8th graders take Algebra 1 and are successful. We're not going to change that. 10% of our 7th graders start with Algebra 1, and we don't intend to change that.
Of course, the tests are going to be on a different...
The second question that I'll answer, and please give me a chance to explain at some point before you throw me out of the room, is no, our teachers aren't ready yet. And I don't blame them for that, and we're going to work to be ready, and I'll give you some more detail on that. You talked a little bit about the concept of competitive federalism, something that I happen to agree with. Let me tell you about how competitive Conejo Valley Unified School District is. Our kids are achieving at the very highest levels in this state by any measure. Our API scores put us at near the top 5%. Our graduation rate exceeds 97%. And because we don't give up on the 3 that don't graduate in 4 years, our dropout rate is less than 1%.